On this observance of Veterans Day, as we enjoy the life brought forth by the recent and much needed rain, I'm reminded again of why today is a day for reflection and gratitude. In preparation for this morning, I stood in my warm, comfortable home, selecting clean clothing and rehearsing a speech that I hope will publicly convey my strong support of our military. The freedom to publicly declare one's opinion is, after all, among the most utilized yet underappreciated in our nation, and it is often forgotten that not all in the world share such a liberty. After that, I drove the well-kept streets, never once concerned about the possibility of a roadside explosive, and entered this beautiful building filled with the life, love, and laughter that can only be carried on the shoulders of freedom. I get to do all of those things because since the inception of this great nation, brave men and women have been standing guard. Men and women like those in this room. Some of you protected our freedoms with an oath to serve, put on a uniform, and picked up a weapon. Some of you were military children, parents, or spouses, and you loved one of these warriors, and you served our nation through letters and love, and through fervent prayers for their safety. Whatever your form of service, I am so grateful and humbled by the opportunity to stand before you today. 8 years ago, I watched as the weathered hand of Anthony J. Malin, whom I'd met only days earlier at Normandy American Cemetery, pointed out where his landing craft had come ashore on Utah Beach and where several of his buddies from LST 350 had fallen. He was a spry, sharp man of 88 then, but as he recollected his experience on the anniversary of a June day that had been history for more than 7 decades, his face was 17 again. For a few moments, we weren't just listening to old memories. We were standing on the sidelines of history, his history, and watching it play out in his eyes, an old, silent, reel-to-reel projection that he'd been kind enough to narrate for us. I'd meet many veterans and have a number of incredible moments on that first life-changing trip to Normandy. But that afternoon on Utah Beach is particularly beautiful to me because of its rarity. In a world that seems to thrive on attention-seeking behavior, veterans are a breed all their own, and while typically eager to offer humorous, usually embarrassing stories about their buddies, and heroic remembrances of their fallen comrades, many have very little to say about the role they played in safeguarding our freedom. This is why I'm humbled and honored to play some small part in celebrating them, not just today, but every day. I'm not a veteran. There's no doubt that when it comes to military service experience, there are far more qualified people who could be standing before you today. Still, on a day when the veterans of this nation are to be honored, I'd like to believe that I am exactly the type of person you should be hearing from, precisely because I am part of the 93% of the adult population who is drinking deeply from wells of freedom that I had no part in digging. Oxford defines cynicism as an inclination to believe that people are motivated purely by self-interest, and I hate to admit that despite all we have to be grateful for, it can be easy to look around and give oneself over to the thought that there is a limit to the goodness left in the world, to become a cynic. Perhaps then it was fate that Veterans Day came to fall right after the madness of election season, because in those moments when our country seems determined to tear itself apart, we need a reminder that there are millions who have fought to hold it all together. By the 6th of April 1917, the date the United States declared war on Germany, the fighting had raged in Europe for 3 years. And in 585 days of involvement, the U.S. enacted the Selective Service Act and drafted 4 million men into military service. As the summer of 1918 dawned, some 2 million U.S. service members had arrived in France. About half of those eventually saw frontline service, and more than 100,000 never saw home again. Between the fighting, the genocides, and the disease, casualties on both sides, both military and civilian, were high. Still, the Allies pressed forward, and the Germans officially conceded victory at the 11th hour on November 11, 1918. 1 year later, the first Armistice Day, what we now know as Veterans Day, celebrated the end of World War I. In the 104 years since the war that was supposed to end all wars, more than 20 million brave Americans have endured the cruelty of battle. The greatest generation ripped so violently from their peace at Pearl Harbor and spread across 2 oceans and 3 continents just 23 years after World War I came to an end. The forgotten men of the forgotten war in Korea, and those who wish they could forget the ugliness and pain of Vietnam. War is ugly. It is hellish and strange. It is life-altering and country-altering. Every conflict has been different and left us changed in a different way, but every conflict, whether a downed helicopter in the middle of Mogadishu or a rocky mountainside in Afghanistan, has left us, along with the scars, one shining beacon of hope: the American veteran. You need to know that you are not forgotten. The painful reality is that about half of the veterans alive today received far less than a hero's welcome when they returned to American soil, and after spending time on the shores of Normandy and watching the reverence with which our veterans and even our active duty service members are treated by those whose ancestors had a front row seat to the horrors of war, I am concerned that our collective apathy toward our own veteran population is tantamount to yet another betrayal by the people you fought for. I'm on a mission to bridge that gap, and I need you to know that regardless of political commentary or social climate, when these days of honor and memoriam come around each year and you are taking time to reflect, there are many who never earned a rank or stood at attention reflecting with you. There are many who are grateful to the brave souls who sacrificed everything so that we could have anything, and more grateful still that you made it home. The people who know me best will tell you that I've always been an old soul, and perhaps that is why I fell in love with military history, and particularly World War II history, early in my life. Not with dates or battles, or with a catalog of weaponry, but with the things that weren't always in the history books. The stories of those who'd seen the world at war, who they were and who they had become, what they learned and what they had to teach us. My earliest clear memory is of my father's face amid rows of fresh boot camp graduates. I was 3 and he was the old man of the class at the ripe age of 25. I remember the pomp and circumstance of the ceremony, and I remember the reverence with which those men saluted their flag and pledged life and limb to protect our nation. I was a bit young to understand the blank check they were writing at the time, but a spark ignited in my heart that day. 3 years later, that spark billowed to a flame standing atop the USS Arizona Memorial. It was there, watching as the murky shadow of a once great ship shed oily black tears of grief over the souls she'd been forced to entomb, that I knew for the first time that I was meant to be a storyteller. By the time I met those veterans on the beaches of Normandy in 2015, I'd been trying to figure out what story I was meant to be telling for 26 years. I've since come to learn that experience is the greatest teacher, and it struck a chord on that beach when I realized just how few would ever get to share in a moment like the one I'd been a part of. The average age of a veteran in the United States is 58, and more than 35% are over the age of 65. Of the over 16 million who served in World War II, less than 120,000 are left, and just a single surviving member, Lieutenant Commander Lou Conter, remains from the crew of the USS Arizona. We are now losing our Vietnam veterans at a rate of almost 400 per day. In other words, every single day in this country, we lose 1,000 more stories, 1,000 more opportunities to glean from these brave souls the kind of hard-won wisdom that can only be passed on by those who have seen the best and worst of humanity and lived to tell the tale. On 3 trips to the European front, one realization always plays a bittersweet note on my heartstrings: that our own veterans are collectively treated with far more regard over there than they are at home. I could describe the reenactments and the monuments, or tell you about the weeks surrounding anniversaries of definitive events like D-Day or the Battle of the Bulge. People are jubilant, dressed in period clothes and uniforms. Flags are flying high and there's music coming from everywhere. Every shop window is painted. Even the tiniest of villages has a museum, a monument, or a plaque wreathed in flowers, and the beaches and foxholes are so awash in fragrant blooms that it seems as though there is one for each of the millions who served, stretching as far as the eye can see. The veterans look fondly on these versions of their younger selves who dance and sing in the streets. Restored warplanes fly over, the sound of their approach unmistakable as they thunder across the sky like the hooves of a herd of stallions carrying freedom in their wake. Parades and museums aren't really what we are missing out on, though. What we are missing, or in fact allowing to go to waste, are the stories. There are veterans who give speeches, sit on discussion panels, and speak to school children. The stories of the liberators have been passed down by the liberated, and the relics of the war remain as a stark reminder of what once was and what could happen again if the causes at the root are forgotten or hidden away. Maybe it's because we haven't had such extended horror so close to home. 9/11 was horrible, and for a while it seemed to spark something in us. But when the war moved overseas, our feelings faded. We didn't have to see it every day. The fear, the bloodshed. We didn't have foreign soldiers occupying our homes or taking our food or shooting our civilians out of revenge. We never had to hear the cries of the wounded day after day as our churches became aid stations. There have been no makeshift cemeteries in our country holding our fallen until the war was over and we could give them the hallowed ground they fought and died for. Not for many, many generations. And we have forgotten. We've forgotten that in the nearly 250 years since the United States declared independence, young men and women, many not old enough to buy a beer, have been holding our very freedom in their hands. Hands that had barely experienced life before they swore an oath to this nation. Hands that hadn't yet worn a wedding ring, and hands that had to wait months to hold children that were not yet born when they left. I will say, though, that while I feel a deep sense of responsibility in returning our veterans and our fallen to the forefront of the public consciousness and making sure that they and their families are cared for, there is an alternative way to view this slip of the American mind, as evidence of a job well done. The American service member has so wrapped us in this blanket of freedom and security that we can forget that there are places where people have never known a world without war. So blessed are we by those who walk into the fire that we take liberty as a given and national security as a way of life. You, those currently serving, and those we hold in our hearts today have done your jobs so well that we can walk through our lives with a sort of blind naivety, mostly oblivious to the wolves at the door who would do us harm. You and your brothers and sisters in arms served, at least in part, because you wanted to leave the world better for your children and grandchildren. And if they are now able to be more focused on identifying and fixing problems within our own borders, it is only because you've succeeded. The protection you have so selflessly provided has given us the freedom to put war, something that is a way of life in many parts of the world, in the back of our minds. However, if war is to remain something that happens on the other side of the world, then we must make it a priority to pass down the history, much like the people of Normandy do. Not with a list of obscure dates and dots on a map, but with faces. The faces of fathers and brothers, of sisters and cousins, of grandfathers and the grandmothers that waited for them and held down the fort at home. Their voices should narrate the history of our freedoms, and when they are gone, their stories should be recorded in such rich detail that it is as though we are remembering ourselves. This is our library, and every veteran is a new book just waiting to be opened. Many of us will be blessed enough to never see war up close. But consider for a moment the wisdom that we are missing out on by only taking these narratives out of the cupboard on special occasions. My secret, selfish, and most important reason for being here today is to plead with you to do one more great service for your country. Tell your stories. By the time my great-grandmother was my age, she had seen the rise of the automobile, 2 world wars, the birth of the space program, and gained the right to vote for the first time. I'm the person that I am today because I grew up at the feet of grandparents and great-grandparents and the retirement home residents my mother worked with, all willing to tell their stories to a young girl eager to listen as they spoke of the past, of things seen and things learned, of mistakes and triumphs, of love and hate, of war and peace. The early curiosities and passions awakened by these stories have led to a lifetime of seeking knowledge and blessed me with opportunities and honors beyond my wildest imagination. Opportunities that led me through hallowed ground on the cliffs and the beaches of France and the woods of Belgium, walking alongside the heroes who fought there as they shared their memories. Honors like reading the letters of a Vietnam vet who was desperate to explain to his own family how that experience had shaped him, and confident that I would be able to put into written words what he wasn't sure he could talk about. Each of you has a story too. Each of you has years of knowledge and experience within you, a vein of gold running through like a mine waiting to be excavated. And as we lose 1,000 veterans a day, we lose more and more of that much-needed wisdom. In the second half of each year, we reflect on the anniversaries of 2 days that shaped the last century of American history. 82 years ago, the Pacific Fleet was resting comfortably on a Sunday morning in the tropical paradise when distant buzz of approaching planes grew into the chaotic roar of a war brought to our doorstep. As World War II ended and the survivors of the Day of Infamy slipped into quiet anonymity, Our nation found other internal battles to wage and began to grow comfortable again with war being some distant specter that occurred only in faraway lands. 22 years ago, 4 passenger planes again shook us out of our complacency and comfort, reminding us that the relative safety we enjoy is hard-won and reinforcing the adage, united we stand. While days like those never seemed so long ago to those of us who lived through them, there is now an entire wave of adults who were not even alive when it happened. A whole group who were not there to witness our nation brought together by crisis and tragedy of unspeakable magnitude. And all the while, the number of those who lived through both of these days dwindles away like sand through an hourglass. Perhaps now more than ever, we should be tapping into the insight of those who came before us, veteran and civilian alike. What could we learn about the ignorance of prejudice from 2 men of opposing backgrounds dug into a foxhole together as fire rained down around them? What could we learn about loss from a woman who stood frozen with a child on her hip as a Western Union telegram or a pair of solemn men in uniform told her that her world would never be the same? What could we learn from her child, witnessing the strength of a parent who worked hard every day to provide a good life and a hopeful future? Even in everyday moments, there are lessons to be learned. Once upon a time, every veteran was part of a tidal wave, shaping the world on a global scale. Now, here at home, I ask you to be a ripple in the water. You who have waited weeks for a letter from home, provide perspective on patience in a world of instant gratification. You who have experienced unrelenting fear, offer opinions on fortitude and perseverance. You who have fought with darkness, let your experience shine a light. You who have waded out into the deep waters of life, I beg you, send ripples back toward the shore to brush against the feet of those who are just beginning to dip their toes in. Tell them about war. Tell them about peace. Tell them about your first kiss, your first car, your first love, and if all 3 of those things are the same. Tell them about getting your heart broken and about the first time you saw their mother or grandmother. Tell them about the first time you held them and the things about them that make you the most proud. Tell them about the parts of history that you were there to witness and what you thought at the time. Tell your stories on behalf of those who never had the chance. Remind us who they were and help us reflect on who they might have been. Be the voice of conscience in the head of a new generation, reminding us not to squander the opportunities that came to us on the blood, sweat, and tears of others, and using your past and their memory to push us toward a better future. Pour your wisdom out so that those you love and fought so hard for can drink it in. Tell your story because yours is a story worth telling. Paratrooper Jim Pee Wee Martin, a veteran of D-Day, Operation Market Garden, and the Battle of the Bulge, insisted that nobody should thank him for his sacrifice, because he never considered what he did to be a sacrifice. Army Ranger George Klein, who spent D-Day scaling the cliffs at Pointe du Hoc before laying wounded at the top for 3 days while a battle raged around him, announced that the real greatest generation would always be the youth of America, who stand ready and willing when a wolf growls at the door, and as most veterans will, reminded us that the real heroes are the ones who never made it home. Still, as I stand before you, the proud daughter, granddaughter, and great-granddaughter of veterans, this one day a year seems so pale. Generation by generation, brave men and women have been willing to take up the watch, protecting our freedoms. I won't say thank you for your service, because I know that for many of you, your service required things you may not deem worthy of thanks. Instead, I will say thank you for your willingness to serve. Thank you for carrying the burden of your experiences so that others could go about their lives as though war only occurred in some alternate version of reality. Thank you for placing yourself between me and the enemy. Thank you for being our conscience, our memory. The idea of our military fighting for our freedom has become, in the minds of some, hyperbolic and outdated, but I say to those people that liberty is much more than declaring independence from another nation or waging war against a would-be conqueror. Freedom, true freedom, is freedom from fear. It is knowing that I can drive here today in peace and knowing that there are those willing to stand in the way so that the fight does not come to our shores as it has to so many others. Walking the paths along that cliffside in Arromanches, I looked back inland toward the German battery that remains there, guns still in place as though they had just finished raining death down on the beaches below, to take a photograph. Stretched between the cliff and the emplacement, and on either side, for as far as the eye could see, was a field of colza in full bloom, its sweet scent floating carefree on the June breeze as a gentle reminder that the earth will reclaim her land from the battle if you let her. But the veteran remains. Our line between remembrance and obscurity, the literal heartbeat keeping our history alive. To quote one more of our D-Day veterans, Medic Ray Lambert, every man who walked into those machine guns and that artillery fire on Omaha Beach that day, every man was a hero. What kind of person would I be if I didn't tell their stories? I hope you won't mind if, for as long as I am able, I keep telling yours. Thank you.
Why don't you take this over? Mine is on.
We probably won't need this.
1, 2, 3, Rudolph the Red. Had a very shiny.
We spent a lot of time. Part of learning what unit synergy is marching and singing, and so we did a great deal of that, and we'll give you a little example of some of that now. Pay attention. First Division, Big Red One, grab your weapon, follow me. We are Army Infantry. 101st, Screaming Eagle. Grab your chutes and follow me. We are Airborne Infantry. 82nd, All American. Grab your weapon, follow me. We are Airborne Infantry. C-130 sitting on the ground. Two big engines rolling round. C-130 going down the strip. Your airborne ranger gonna take a little trip. Stand up, hook up, shuffle to the door. Stand up, hook up, shuffle to the door. Jump right out and count to 4. If my chute don't open wide, I got a reserve by my side. If my chute don't open round, I'll be the first one on the ground. There it is, airborne.